Inside, a particular church, the air trembled with grief. A young preacher stood at the pulpit, hands gripping the edges, his voice breaking as he read the scripture. The congregation didn't know what to expect. They had never seen him so shaken, so stripped of the bold confidence that usually marked his sermons. "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." His voice faltered. The coffin before him held more than a body. It held his first wife, the woman he had loved, the partner who had stood with him through financial ruin, misunderstanding, and the early struggles of ministry. And now, in the suffocating silence of that storm-soaked church, J.C.Ryle felt a crushing truth settle upon him. A truth that would shape the rest of his life. God sometimes builds his strongest soldiers through the fires they never prayed for. A tear slipped down his cheek, hidden by the dim light. But the congregation noticed something else, a quiet fire in his eyes, a resolve, a holy defiance. Because even as death hovered like a shadow over the room, Ryle's faith was being rebuilt, not destroyed. He didn't know it then, but this night of sorrow would become the seed of the writings that would one day circle the world, words that would anchor souls, books that would outlive empires, a voice that would thunder across generations. But to understand how he reached this moment, to understand the weight behind his words, we must go back to the beginning. The story doesn't start in a church. It starts in a mansion, one filled with wealth, privilege, expectations, and a hidden fragility that would one day collapse without warning. John Charles Ryle was born into a world that glimmered with opportunity. His father was a wealthy banker, polished, persuasive, admired by many. The Ryle household moved with the ease of money, fine horses, elegant dinners, prestigious education. Young John was taught that success was the natural order of his life, that the world would always make room for those who carried themselves with confidence. But beneath the polished surface was a truth no one dared to speak. Wealth is a fragile master, and the world can crumble overnight. Still, the young man walked with pride through the halls of Eton and Oxford. Tall, athletic, intellectually sharp, he cut a striking figure. He excelled at rowing. He was admired for wit and strength. He seemed destined for public life, perhaps politics, perhaps Parliament itself. He was convinced quietly but confidently that he would shape the world. One morning, during his final year at Oxford, Ryle entered a small village church to escape a sudden storm. It was an ordinary decision, a brief shelter, a momentary pause. But destiny often hides itself in the smallest interruptions. As he stepped inside, the simple service had already begun. The curate read the second lesson with a slow, deliberate voice. The words floated across the room like a quiet flame. "For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God." Ryle froze. Something moved in his soul, sudden, sharp, undeniable. Light broke through a place he didn't know was dark. The scripture pierced him with supernatural clarity. That moment changed everything. It rearranged him. It awakened him. Later he would say, "That passage converted me." He didn't fall to his knees. He didn't shout or weep. But a fire began to burn inside him, a fire for truth, for scripture, for the gospel. A fire that would one day make him one of the clearest voices in evangelical Christianity. Yet even as God ignited his soul, life was preparing a storm that would nearly destroy everything. After graduation, Ryle returned to his family home expecting a comfortable future. Politics still seemed likely. A respected position, a smooth path. Then the impossible happened. One morning, the family awoke to news that swept through the estate like a cold wind. The bank had collapsed. Everything was gone. The Ryle fortune built over decades was wiped out in a single day. John's world shattered. All the dreams built on wealth evaporated. The social standing that had opened doors suddenly evaporated. The plans for Parliament, influence, prestige gone. The Ryle family fell from wealth to ruin overnight. And John, stunned and heartbroken, faced the first great turning point of his life. Would he cling to his old dreams, or surrender to God's new direction? There, in the ashes of broken plans, he made a quiet decision that would shape Christian history. He chose ministry, not because he felt strong, not because he felt prepared, but because everything else had been stripped away, leaving only God. Sometimes the Lord allows our foundations to crumble, so that He alone can become our rock. Ryle accepted a small parish in Exbury. The house was cold and draughty. His salary was barely enough to live on. He went from a life of servants and luxury to chopping his own firewood and patching his own roof. His first wife, Matilda, fell ill shortly after their marriage. Ryle prayed. He waited. He fought with hope. But the illness deepened, and the young preacher watched helplessly as the woman he loved slipped toward eternity. Her death broke something inside him, but it also forged something eternal. In his grief, he discovered a truth that flows like living water through all his future writings. Christ is never more real than in the hour of sorrow. It was in the darkness that the clarity of Christ shone brightest. It was in loss that compassion was born. It was in weakness that God shaped a shepherd's heart. Over the next years, Ryle remarried, fathered children, and served faithfully in rural parishes. He wasn't famous. He wasn't celebrated. But he preached with a rare clarity, a precision of truth that cut through confusion like a blade. He spoke plainly, passionately, urgently. He didn't care for theological fog or academic complication. He believed the gospel should be clear enough for a child to grasp, and powerful enough for a dying sinner to cling to. His voice began to rise, slowly, quietly, steadily. Little tracts he wrote, simple, sharp, gospel-saturated, began circulating across England. People passed them between friends. Workers read them on lunch breaks. Parents read them to children. Pastors quoted them in sermons. His words spread, and spread, and spread, like sparks blowing across a sleeping forest. Then came the turning point, the moment God lifted him onto a national platform. Ryle was appointed the first Bishop of Liverpool, a city swirling with spiritual confusion, a battlefield of theological conflict, a place where liberal theology, ritualism, and skepticism were pulling hearts in every direction. Most men would have trembled. Ryle straightened his shoulders. A lifetime of trials had prepared him for this moment. Financial ruin had taught him humility. The death of his wife had carved compassion into him. Rural parishes had trained his voice. Loss had stripped him of pride. Sorrow had given him steel. God had built a warrior, not the loud kind, not the flashy kind, but a shepherd who would stand firm when others bent. And as he stepped into Liverpool, he felt the weight of calling settle on him like a mantle. This was not the life he had dreamed of at Oxford. It was better, harder but holier, more costly but more eternal. His sermons grew bolder. His writings grew sharper. His heart grew deeper, because everything he wrote came from a place carved by God's own hand. Holiness, expository thoughts on the Gospels, practical religion, books that would shape generations, books still shaping us today. But even as his influence rose, even as the Church of England wrestled between truth and compromise. Ryle didn't know one more storm was coming. A storm that would nearly break him again. A storm that would test everything he'd built his ministry on. It began when he received a letter from his son. Not a letter of affection, not a letter of joy, but a letter filled with theological rebellion, a fire Ryle had prayed desperately would never ignite. His son Herbert had embraced the rising tide of liberal theology. He questioned the authority of Scripture, the necessity of conversion, the reality of judgment, the exclusivity of Christ. Herbert was not a stranger to the gospel. He grew up under it, ate at the same table where prayers were whispered, listened to sermons from one of the clearest evangelical voices of the century. Yet now he resisted all of it. He rejected the truth his father had preached for decades. Ryle's hands shook. This was the storm he never saw coming. The storm that struck not from outside the church, but from within his own family. For a long moment, he could hardly breathe. A bishop can stand against critics. He can face opposition. He can endure mockery and misunderstanding. But a father, facing spiritual drift in his own son, that wound cuts deeper than any blade forged by man. Ryle sank into his chair. The room felt colder. His heart felt heavier. He whispered, "Lord, keep him. Don't let him drift beyond your reach." It was a prayer he would pray for years. A reminder that even the strongest spiritual leaders walk through valleys no title can shield them from. But instead of breaking him, this sorrow softened him even further. His preaching became more compassionate. His warnings against spiritual complacency gained new urgency. His writings carried the weight of a father pleading for wandering children everywhere. And yet, even as personal grief pressed him down, God was preparing to lift him to one of the most influential seasons of his life. Liverpool had never seen a bishop like him. He wasn't interested in ceremony. He wasn't impressed by ecclesiastical politics. He wasn't trying to charm crowds or appease critics. He wanted souls saved. He wanted truth proclaimed. He wanted the gospel crystal clear. He preached Christ simply. He preached Christ boldly. He preached Christ uncompromisingly. And the city listened. One evening, as he stepped into a crowded hall lit by gas lamps and bustling with working-class men and women, the atmosphere hummed with tension. The topic was controversial holiness. Many misunderstood the word. Some saw it as legalism. Others dismissed it as impossible. Still others treated it as optional. But Ryle walked to the pulpit as if stepping into a furnace. He carried in his soul the grief of loss, the collapse of wealth, the sorrow of watching his son wander, and those wounds gave him an authority that could not be manufactured. The room fell silent. With a voice both tender and thunderous, he said, "Holiness is the habit of being of one mind with God." The words dropped like stones into a lake, sending ripples through hearts. He lifted his Bible and continued, "Be ye holy, for I am holy." 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 16. His eyes scanned the crowd. This is not bondage, this is freedom. This is not misery, this is joy. This is not a burden, this is Christ formed in you. You could feel the weight in the room shift. People leaned forward, some wiped tears. Others stared at the floor as truth exposed their hidden struggles. Ryle alternated between gentleness and urgency, between quiet appeal and bold proclamation. His pacing carried the rhythm of a heartbeat, soft, then strong, then soft again. He spoke of sin not as an abstract idea, but as a chain that must be shattered. He spoke of God's love not as a sweet sentiment, but as a force that transforms everything it touches. He He spoke of holiness not as perfection but as direction, a steady walk toward Christ. But he had no idea what would happen next. After the meeting, a young dock worker approached him, eyes wet, hands trembling. "Bishop, is there hope for someone like me?" Ryle placed a hand on the man's shoulder. There is always hope when a man comes to Christ. That simple moment, one among thousands, revealed the heart of his ministry. He was a bishop, yes. A writer, yes. A theologian, yes. But above all, he was a shepherd of souls, and souls were his treasure. But not everyone rejoiced in his influence. Some clergymen despised his clarity. Some academics criticized his plainness. Some accused him of being old-fashioned. Some said he was dividing the church with his insistence on conversion. Newspapers mocked him. Theological opponents wrote against him. Some labelled him narrow, severe, unyielding. If only they knew the tenderness behind the firmness, the compassion behind the warnings, the tears behind the convictions. But Ryle didn't answer critics with anger. He answered with scripture. He didn't fight with aggression. He fought with truth. When asked how he endured constant opposition, he said, "I am one of those old-fashioned ministers who believe the whole Bible." And that was enough. His writings multiplied. His influence expanded. His voice strengthened. But life had one more unexpected twist. The Church of England's political structures shifted. Leaders who opposed his evangelical convictions gained power. And slowly, subtly, the bishop who had poured his strength into Liverpool found himself sidelined, his recommendations ignored, his concerns dismissed. It was a quiet kind of persecution, not dramatic, not violent, but real, the kind that wears on the soul, the kind that drains resolve, the kind that whispers, "Your work is ending." Ryle felt the ache. He felt the weight of age pressing on his shoulders, the pain of being misunderstood, the sorrow of watching compromise creep into the church he loved. But he did not grow bitter. He did not lash out. He did not retreat into despair. He simply worked harder. He prayed deeper. He wrote more clearly. He preached more passionately. His final years in Liverpool became some of his most spiritually powerful, not because he was young and strong, but because he was aged and surrendered. He learned to lean not on influence, not on success, not on approval, but on Christ alone. And as the day approached when he would lay aside his office and retire into quiet obscurity, something unexpected happened. Letters poured in, hundreds, thousands, from pastors, missionaries, mothers, factory workers, sailors, students, coal miners, widows, and prisoners. People he had never met, people he had never visited, people whose lives had been touched by words he wrote decades earlier. Some wrote, "Your book turned my heart to Christ. Your sermon restored my hope. Your tract saved my marriage. Your words awakened me from spiritual sleep." Ryle read them slowly, tears rising unbidden. This was his harvest. Not applause, not rank, not titles, not approval from earthly leaders. Souls, lives changed, men and women drawn to Christ. And deep within him he whispered, "Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but unto thy name give glory." Psalm 115, verse 1. But his journey was not over, because in the quiet of retirement, away from the pulpit, away from the bustling streets of Liverpool, away from the controversies and conflicts, Ryle was about to write the most spiritually penetrating words of his life. One afternoon, as a dim light filtered through the frosted windows, Ryle picked up a pen with trembling fingers. His hand shook not from fear, but from determination. His eyes scanned a stack of letters from young ministers, missionaries, students, and ordinary believers across England and beyond. They all asked the same question: how do I walk with God in a world full of compromise? Ryle breathed deeply. The same question he had wrestled with as a young man in Oxford, the same question he had answered from pulpits for decades, now echoed again in his final years. And so, slowly, painfully, but with unbreakable clarity, he began to write, paragraph by paragraph, line by line, sentence by sentence, each word carved out of a lifetime of joy and sorrow, each sentence sharpened on the stone of personal trial, each chapter weighted with the wisdom of a man who had lost and gained much. This final season produced some of the richest spiritual writings the world has ever known. Ryle wrote with urgency, not hurried, but holy urgency. He wrote as a man standing at the edge of eternity, looking back at the road he had travelled. He wrote as a shepherd who wanted his flock to walk rightly when he was gone. Books like Holiness, Practical Religion, and Walking with God took shape in these years not as theological textbooks, but as living testimonies, lamps lit by a lifetime of obedience. And every page carried a piece of him, his conviction, his compassion, his courage. Age continued its relentless march. Strength failed. His eyesight dimmed. His legs grew weak. His voice grew faint. Yet even in physical decline, his spiritual fire intensified. He prayed more than ever. He read Scripture slowly, savouring every line. He meditated on the promises of eternity with childlike joy. He was no longer a man of influence. He was simply a believer waiting for his Lord. One evening, as the last light of day faded, Ryle opened his Bible to the Gospel of John. He read aloud through trembling lips, "Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me." John chapter 14, verse 1. His voice broke. These were the words that had carried him through the darkest valleys, the words he had preached at countless funerals, the words he had whispered to grieving families, the words he clung to when financial ruin shook his world, the words he held when his young bride was laid in the ground, the words he prayed for his son, the words he now held as the shadows lengthened around him. He closed the Bible gently and leaned back, eyes half closed, heart steady. He slipped from time into eternity, like a man stepping from one room into another. The world lost a voice. Heaven gained a worshipper. Earth lost a shepherd. But eternity welcomed a faithful soldier. And though his physical voice fell silent, his writings never did. Long after his passing, his words travelled across oceans, across generations, across cultures. They reached pastors in Africa, missionaries in Asia, students in America, believers in Europe. They challenged, corrected, strengthened, encouraged, awakened. His books never softened truth to win applause. They never diluted the gospel to suit trends. They never bowed to cultural pressure. Why? Because they were not written to please men. They were written to glorify God. Today, J.C.Ryle is remembered not merely as the Bishop of Liverpool, not merely as a writer, not merely as a theologian, but as a man whose life embodied one unshakable conviction. Clarity is kindness when souls are at stake. And as we look back at his journey from wealth to ruin, from sorrow to strength, from obscurity to global influence, we discover a profound truth woven through every chapter of his story. God builds giants in the secret place. God strengthens leaders through brokenness. God shapes shepherds through storms. God purifies voices through fire. God prepares vessels by emptying them. Ryle never intended to become famous. He never sought a platform. He never pursued influence. He simply obeyed. And obedience, quiet, steady, costly obedience, is the kind of legacy that outlives empires and echoes into eternity. His life whispers to us today. Follow Christ plainly. Love him deeply. Serve him faithfully. Stand for truth boldly. And trust him completely. In a world filled with spiritual fog, Ryle still calls to us with a voice clear as morning air. Holiness is the habit of being of one mind with God. May we walk that path. May we stand firm where he stood firm. May we love the truth he loved. May we cling to the Christ he clung to until his final breath. And may the God who strengthened J.C.Ryle strengthen us also to run our race, fight our fight, and finish our course with joy.